Hello, everyone. Good evening, and welcome to yet another edition of the Indian Express E-Explained, our series of explanatory discussions with newsmakers, policymakers, and domain experts. I am Monojit Majumdar, editor for explanatory journalism at the Indian Express. Explained, as some of you already realize and know, is a unique project because it is rooted in news, but it seeks to go beyond just the news. It is context, it is background, it is connecting the dots, it is explanation. It is what gives you a richer, fuller, more nuanced understanding of what is going on in the world around us. Today, we are talking about India's new national education policy, what's in it, and what does it seek to achieve. For 34 years, in which India has become completely unrecognizable from its past, the country's national framework of education too is set to change. Now, in what ways does the NEP seek to align India's school and higher education with the needs of the times? What priorities has the policy identified? And how does it propose to achieve them? What's in it for you and your children as they seek empowerment and preparation for the future? To shed light on all these issues and more, we have with us tonight Senior IAS Officer Shri Amit Khare, Secretary Higher Education, and really the key individual behind the creation of the NEP. Mr. Khare, welcome to the Indian Express, sir. We are honored to have you with us. Thank you for your time. Speaking to Mr. Khare will be my colleague Ritika Chopra, who has been tracking all the major developments in the field of education in India for the past several years, including, of course, the NEP. Ritika will start with a short presentation on the NEP, essentially laying the ground for the discussion that will follow. Thereafter, Mr. Khare and she will have an explanatory conversation on the NEP for about 45 minutes or so, and then we will open the floor for a limited number of questions from you, the audience. Thank you for joining us. Welcome once again, Ritika.
Thank you, Monaji. Thank you, Khare sir, for agreeing to be our guest this evening. Before we jump into the discussion, I would just take about 2 minutes to make a brief presentation to give our audience a background of what we're going to discuss today. So just quickly, what is a national education policy? Why is there so much debate around it since past week? National education policy comes around once every few decades. It's supposed to give us a broad framework of where the education system should be heading. So this policy in its current form, and as is true for the two policies that came out in the past. In fact, actually, we've just had 3 education policies since independence, the third one being the one that was released last week. This policy in its current shape is not binding on the states. As of now, as I mentioned, it gives us a broad framework. From here on, the center and the states will have to work together to actually implement this policy. Just to give you an example, Tamil Nadu till date does not follow the 3-language formula, which was actually first prescribed in the first education policy in 1968. So this is actually the policy that was released last week is a 60-odd page document. It has a lot of proposals, a lot of reforms in it. I mean, we will not be able to elaborate on every single one of them, but I'm just giving you a few highlights of this policy. Starting with higher education, it talks about replacing the UGC and the AICT with one umbrella, sort of an overarching regulator, which would be called the Higher Education Commission of India. It talks about opening up the higher education space to foreign players. What do we mean by that? Basically, it would allow foreign universities to enter the Indian higher education space and maybe even set up campuses here. It talks about giving, starting a 4-year multidisciplinary undergraduate program with multiple exit options. In the past, for whatever reasons, if you had to discontinue your higher education, you frankly did not have anything to show for it. But now, if you had to say discontinue your course, probably because you didn't think it was useful enough or because of other extenuating circumstances, say if you left after a year, you would leave with a certificate. After the second year, you would leave with a diploma. After the third year, you get a degree. And after the fourth year, I said, if you complete the entire undergraduate, multidisciplinary undergraduate program, you would leave with a degree with research. As far as master's programs are concerned, now the NEP says that higher education institutions would have the flexibility to design it, which means that it could be anything. Institutions could offer a 1-year master's program, could even offer a 2 years master's program, but it would depend on your undergraduate degree, whether you have a 3-year undergraduate degree or whether you have a 4-year undergraduate degree. Interestingly, the MPhil program, it proposes to discontinue that. It also talks about setting up a national research foundation, which would sort of pump in a lot of investment into research in higher education. Coming quickly to school education, I'm sort of highlighting 3 major things which stand out. I've mentioned it's an exhaustive document. We can't highlight everything, but this document talks about overhauling curriculum, reducing curriculum, it has a thrust on experiential learning and critical thinking. It talks about replacing the current 10+2 structure of schooling with something, what they're calling it is a 5+3+3+4. This could sound a little confusing, but essentially what this means is that this would bring in 3 years of preschool, which is children of ages 3, 4, 5 who were studying in Anganwadis in the government setup, or what we commonly know as preschool in the private setup. They would be brought into formal education. Lastly, there is emphasis on teaching students in their mother tongue at least up to class 5. This has been mentioned in the past. There has been an emphasis on this in the past as well. So now, so we'll start with the discussion. So if you can, basically this policy does admit that there are problems with the education sector currently. It says that, the ecosystem is fragmented, there are low standards of teaching, there's lesser emphasis on research. Education, as we know, is a concurrent subject. This is something that you would not be able to implement on your own. For our viewers, if you can begin by telling us how are you going to implement this policy, and if you can maybe try and explain this by giving us 2 examples from the policy, which are on areas which fall within the remit of the state government, and how would you try and implement that?
Thank you, Ritika. In fact, you have made my job easy by giving this brief but a very composite and comprehensive presentation covering both school and higher education. While we are talking about the interventions that you just mentioned, for the viewers and the listeners, let me add that this policy, which we are calling as a transformational change or a transformational reform, it changes actually from teaching to learning. That is the change in the focus. The second change that we are thinking and which the policy brings out is from schooling to education. We think that children are in school, the access is 100%, but what is their learning outcome? The learning outcome in the Indian schools, it has come in various reports that for grade 5 students, they are unable to read and write the text of a grade 3 student. So schooling versus education, focus on education, focus on learning. And if you take the higher education, the present system is institution-centric. If I qualify in some exam and I take, say, mechanical engineering, the rest of my course, my classes, everything has been fixed by the institution, not by me. The new system will give the choice to the student. From institution-centric, we become student-centric. That these are the subjects the student wishes to study at different points of time. That flexibility along with multiple entry and exit will be of the student. And as the Honorable Prime Minister during his address said yesterday only, that from job seekers, that people graduate and then they start seeking jobs, we will be having job creators, students who are interested in their passion, They are innovators, they are entrepreneurs, and they are looking for something to do on their own and not looking for a job, particularly a government job. Having said this, an important issue that has been raised by you and major discussions which are taking place, I'm happy that most people have accepted the policy and the discussion is now centered around implementation. Now, if you take the implementation part, we have divided into three parts. First, there are certain reforms which are non-financial. Very important reforms, say reforming the regulatory structure. It is non-financial, but it requires a new legislation to be approved by the parliament, and we can have that reform. The second is the category of reforms where we do have requirement of funds, but it can be achieved with resource pooling. To give an example, we spend about 1500 crores a year on technology enabled education on different platforms. If we pool these things together through the National Education Technology Forum, which has been proposed in this policy, perhaps in the same funding, we will be able to achieve much more. And the third are the reforms which will require heavy investment. For example, the National Research Foundation, which you just touched upon, or providing breakfast during before the midday meals. That will entail heavy expenditure to be shared by the central government and the states. Now, the question that you raised was, how do you take states on board? It is true that many states are in different levels of educational development. That is the first thing that we have to realize, recognize. For example, the preschool that we talked about, the Anganwadi and the preschooling system, many of the states are already having it. And there are other states who just start from grade one. So this is where there are differences between the states. There are universities which are small and well known. There are other universities which have huge number of affiliated colleges, say 500 to 600 affiliated colleges with 3.5 lakh to 4 lakh students, and they find it difficult to change to the new system. So the first thing that we are doing is to go in a sequential manner in a gradual phase. For example, if we wish to change the 5 plus 3 plus 3 plus 4, the first thing will be to have a national curriculum framework for this 5 plus 3 plus 3 plus 4. The second will be to onboard the states with, not by force, but by informing them the benefits that are likely to accrue. Most states are okay with this new system of 5 plus 3 plus 3 plus 4 because the development of child takes place at an early age. And therefore, it is not a matter of debate of center versus state. It is actually a finding of various experts, education experts, those who are in the field of uh, growth of neurons and so on. Everybody knows that the real growth takes place till the age of 8, and that is the area where we should focus, have activity-based learning. In fact, Tamil Nadu already has an activity-based learning for the early years. Many other states like Tamil Nadu already have it. So these reforms can be brought in immediately. To give you another example, the academic bank of credit that we are talking about. That reform is not very difficult given the IT infrastructure that has been developed in the country. We have already discussed with some of the ITs and we are working that we should have an academic bank of credit. Once we have this academic bank of credit, the next stage will be to have the multiple entry and exit because the credits need to be stored in the bank and that bank will be ready by December. Here, the change will start from the central institutions. and state institutions will have a choice to join as and when they are ready. To give an example, the joint entrance exam that we have for, say, IITs and NITs, examination is used by some of the states for their own engineering admissions. NEET, for example, is used both by the central institutions and some of the state institutions are also part of NEET. So that will be on the same pattern. We give the choice that those who are ready, they can onboard immediately. Those who wish to take time, they will be, for the affiliation system, we have given that it will be phased out in 15 years because we also realize that it will not be easy for any state. And particularly since I have worked more at the state government level for almost 25 years, states have their own difficulties in terms of financing, in terms of relocation of the personnel. So we will have to take care and onboard them in a fashion that the change is gradual, the change is acceptable. What in management terms we call management of change has to be smooth.
So, what about, for instance, if you could tell us, the policy talks about doing away with the practice of frequent transfer of teachers. Teachers obviously are teaching in state government schools. So, how would you try and take states on board? How would you try and implement that? Something which is completely within their remit, like NRF, you can set it up. You can set up the Higher Education Commission. So, what about a recommendation, as specific as that, and which falls within the remit of the state government?
It does fall under the remit of the state government, but broadly speaking, all states are in agreement. Why I'm saying this, that some of the concepts which are being introduced are perhaps equally well known to the states. We also know that frequent transfers of officers and of the staff, particularly of the teachers, it does affect the teaching learning, burdening teachers with administrative work. For example, preparation of, say, various folders for various schemes, etc., which is not a teaching work, it's an administrative work. Everybody in the states also knows that it is affecting them. So if I could broadly say that every state today is concerned about their children. So it's not center versus state. If you take the student as the focal point, then many of the recommendations, whether it applies to the state government or central government, it is equally appealing to all governments. So that is how they are being on board.
The policy actually sets 2040 as the deadline to implement all the recommendations which are mentioned in the document. Can you, for the benefit of our viewers, there are many recommendations and reforms proposed, but for the benefit of our viewers, can you maybe list out the priorities? You've mentioned a few, but what can we see getting implemented, maybe say the next 1 year or before the next academic session? And what do you think would take longer? You've mentioned a few, but say if you can maybe list out a few priorities which you feel are immediate and can be done in the next 1 year, or maybe we could see it taking shape before the new academic session begins.
The one which is longer, why we have written 2040, that a child who is born in 2020, when she or he graduates by 2040, they would have crossed the entirely new education system. Now, coming to the sequencing that we have in our mind, starting from higher education, the first thing will be to introduce the credit bank. Along with that, at least in the institutions of excellence, 20 of them which have been identified, we request them to develop modular courses where entry and exit is possible. Because present courses are semester-wise, but if one exits without studying the other course, say after 1 year without studying the second year, it will be difficult to develop the type of capabilities that are required. Therefore, the new courses will have to be modular, where exit is possible after the 2 semester, 4 semester, 6 semester. By 2021, that is, before we start the academic session 21-22, we'll be having the academic bank of credit working. Central institutions would have shifted to the new system of 4-year courses with multiple attempts. The common entrance test which has been proposed for higher educational institutions like you have SAT, that will be in place for the central institutions, but for the state institutions, because of the different languages which are there at the board level, that will take time. NRF, the note has already been circulated. That NRF that is proposed, it consists of both science as well as social science. It is neutral to the type of university, whether it is a private university or a state university or central university, or a combination, any combination, that they can apply for a research grant. And the evaluation will be of the project and not of the institution. Right now we have certain institutions which are funded at a higher level, others which are at a slightly lower level, and the funding is more in terms of numbers of faculty and students. NRF will be funding based on the outcomes of a project and the requirements and the outcomes of a project. This also will be there in 2021 or maybe by December this year. In the school side, like the Gifted Children program that has already started, the group program which has been mentioned here, for 5+3+4, the remaining part of this academic year is being utilized to develop a framework. Once we have the 5-year framework, the first, 3 years in Anganwadi and grade 1 and grade 2 in the school, that can come those states which are willing to have that system, they can start in 2021. The boards will take time to change, and I was there when these boards changed in 1978, when we shifted from 11-year higher secondary to 12-year of 10+2. For some time, we will also have the two systems running parallel. For example, if I have studied a 3-year course, and all of a sudden I am told it will be great difficulty to me to join the other MA course. So for some time, both 2-year and 1-year courses will be there. Those who are in MPhil, they did have a misunderstanding that their course will get discontinued immediately. We will take care that all those who are enrolled till this year, they are able to complete their course, and then we shift to the new system. The school side, the sequence, if I think, first is to have the framework, then the second is to have syllabi, particularly for class 3 onwards, because the first 5 years are basically activity based, and after syllabi, if required, there will be change of the textbook, but only if it is required. If the framework, for example, why it may be required, that if we introduce 2 grades of maths A and B, then some change in the textbook may be required. If we have 2 levels of examinations, then we may have some changes in the syllabi in the textbook. But the first will be framework, which will be ready by 2021, and we start introducing from grade 1, so that the change is easy.
So let's move on to some of the specific recommendations that stakeholders have doubts and questions about. The first one, we're going to start with the obvious, which is the issue of mother tongue. There's been a lot of debate about this. There is enough research to actually back the idea that kids learn more effectively when they are taught in their mother tongue for the first 5 years. In fact, the emphasis on mother tongue is not new. We've had it since the 50s. It's mentioned in the RT Act. It's been in the past policies as well. In fact, the last All India Education Survey of 2009 says that about 85% of our schools in the country teach children in their mother tongue up to class 5. So when I read the policy, to me, it seemed like a reiteration of something that we've known, something that's been emphasized in the past. But when we hear political leaders and ministers talk about this, the impression that we get is that there is something new about this. So is there something that we're missing here? Because the emphasis on mother tongue has always been there. Is anything different this time? If you can first clarify that.
I'll answer. There are actually two parts to your question. One is
Sir,
whether there is
just
some.
one request though, if you can just move a little closer to the screen, your voice is sounding a little soft and crackling. Yeah, thank you.
One is whether there is any change in the policy. Yes, there is a certain change, and that change lies in the details that we have written. Secondly, about the doubts relating to implementation, that also I'll clarify. Now, the first thing first, what has been written in the policy is mother tongue oblique regional language. If you see at all places, we have written mother tongue oblique regional language because many states have many different languages. For example, Jharkhand, where I come from, there are certain tribal areas who have their language in Santhali, are Hindi-speaking areas, and there is a certain area which was under part of Odisha, but in the state reorganization, that part was included in the then Bihar, not as part of Jharkhand. And the people there speak in Oriya. Their books come from the government of Odisha. So that flexibility has been given by this policy, term oblique regional language. So while implementing, this issue can be easily resolved because we have, firstly, it says preferably, it is not mandatory everywhere. For example, if there is a school in the defense sector, there was a lot of discussion on this point. If there is a school in the defense sector and the defense personnel keep moving, there is a school in the army cantonment, defense personnel are moving, then we cannot have the local language there because it may create difficulty to the personnel who are moving from, the entire unit shifts from one place to another. So mother tongue, and that can be easily decided at the local level. What is important is the micro planning, but micro planning not from Delhi, it will have to be done at the district or the sub-district level. Secondly, teaching of English. People are presuming that the teaching of English will get discontinued. We are talking of medium of instruction. The medium of instruction will be up to grade 5, will be in the mother tongue or the regional language. But as a subject, supposing mother tongue teaching is in Urdu, let's take the example, Hyderabad may be having some areas where they speak Urdu, other areas where they speak Telugu. So they can have their teaching in the medium of instruction in one language, and they can have the other language as a subject. They have either Telugu or English or whatever other language they wish to have. So that this policy gives immense scope and flexibility. The flexibility is there. It is not a very straight jacket, one size fit all, that everybody in Jharkhand will have to study a tribal language or they have to study Hindi. So that option is there at various levels. How do we go about it? Thirdly, English-speaking schools that you said, their number as of now, although it is 85% in the government sector, anyway have the local or the state language. This is, but the enrollments are only 50 to 55%. So for the other 45 who are going to the quote unquote English medium schools, some parents of course are very worried that their child is in grade 5 and 4 and what will happen. As I said, the change will be introduced from grade 1 or maybe from the Anganwadi, that is from the preschool. So the change is I mean, those who have already reached a certain level in that 5-year group, that is up to grade 5, they will not be asked to again relearn. So the new system starts with the new batch. Say, even in the higher education, the new system of multidisciplinary courses and entry exit will come from the new batch of 2021. We cannot apply it retrospectively. Similarly, for the mother tongue up to grade 5, that will be from the new batch and it will start from the entry point, not from the exit point.
So, sir, so that I've understood this properly, you're saying that the change will be gradual. So, even for English medium schools, if they are asked to teach students in their mother tongue, that change would be introduced from class 1 and say not from class 2, 3, and 4. But you're saying that English medium schools would be would this again be compulsory, sir, or could you just elaborate on that? Even if the change comes in at class 1, what would be the nature of this instruction? Would it be compulsory, or would they be encouraged to do this?
No, we are not going for a compulsory model. As you read the entire policy, the policy at every level we want to give a choice. So if you have say 12 schools in one locality, I mean this question was asked to be put to me earlier also. Say if we have 12 schools of central government, let's not talk of state government, central government, if we have 12 schools, some of them are also running in shifts. So we can have one shift for a certain medium of instruction, the other shift for another medium of instruction. So this is very easily worked out, so that it does not become a burden on any parent or the student. After all, the entire focus of the policy is to give more choice, not to reduce their choices.
So, sir, for instance, what about Kendriya Vidyalayas, which are run by the ministry? As of now, they're not teaching in the mother tongue. So, would you all introduce this in Kendriya Vidyalayas starting from class 1? And if yes, when does that happen?
Those details will have to be worked out. But as I said, many towns have many Kendriya there. So it will not be very difficult to have one of them having the regional language, another one having, say, English. Moreover, it is only up to grade 5. We are talking of, say, what in our parlance we call the TGTs, the trained graduate teachers. This policy says that up to grade 5, preferably up to, as possible up to grade 5 or up to grade 8. So up to grade 5, it is not very difficult to bring this change. It looks very difficult to see from Delhi that you have so many lakhs of schools, almost 1 crore teachers. So it looks very difficult from here. But if you look from the level below, say at the district level, it can be planned up. Like if you see election machinery from Delhi, it's an enormous task. Almost 70 crore people who are enrolled as voters. So it's mind-boggling. But the actual work, it is broken down to the constituency, below the constituency. So it is not so difficult. And particularly if we introduce it in a systematic manner, like from grade 1 or even from the pre-schooling, it will not be difficult.
Okay. So, what about the issue of migrating population and multilingual family? The issue of the child's mother tongue, home language being different from the regional language. For instance, if a child has a Punjabi father and a Malayali mother, how do you try and implement this recommendation with regard to using mother tongue as a medium of instruction? This briefly, and then I'll move on to other issues.
This again, after all, they have some home language. Every family would be having some home language.
Sorry, sir, go ahead.
Every family has some home language, and it is not very difficult, even for migrants. Let me just share with you. I read some time back that the board exams of Kerala, the child who stood first was actually a child belonging to a migrant family from the Bihar. So the difficulty that we perceive here is actually not that difficult when it is implemented at the ground level. Say some schools which are in the area which cater mostly to the migrant workers. Say in Gujarat, there would be some areas which have more migrant workers, and they can have Hindi instead of Gujarati. Because if you go down to the locality level, say in Surat, there will be some areas which have more Gujarati, then there will be some areas where you have the migrant workers coming. And that particular one or two schools where you have more migrant workers or the families, that can be in a different medium.
So, but sorry for interrupting you. What about, say, cosmopolitan cities like Delhi, for instance, where you won't really have a community in certain pockets? There are people coming in and living in Delhi from across the country. So what about, say, a city like Delhi?
Here also, people who come and work here, by and large, you will find that they have some local, it's not totally alien. People in Delhi are speaking in Russian. It's not that alien. They are using a language which is local. A young student, if he or she starts in a home language or the regional language or the local language, he will find it very difficult. And as they say, exceptions prove the rule. So there will be 1 or 2% exceptions. But if you take 99%, they will be having either Hindi or Punjabi or let us say, people from South India who have come here. Earlier, I was posted at Ranchi. There was a separate Tamil school because the engineering corporation and various public sectors there are a large number of officers coming from South India. So this type of arrangement is there even now. Even now in Delhi, you have schools who are having students most from Malayalam background or Tamil background. So those schools exist. I mean, DLTA schools are still there today.
Right. So I will move on to the next question. The policy, sir, talks about moving away from and this is related to school education. The policy talks about moving away from high stakes examination, but it also says that we will retain board exams, class 10 and 12 board exams in the current form. But at the same time, the format of the entrance exam, there would be changes in that so that we can try and discourage the culture of coaching. So there seems to be an overlap on the importance given to boards as well as common university exams. We're just trying to understand that, is it not possible, say, at least for the centrally run institutions to admit just based on the board exams so that schools can teach what is more relevant? And frankly, are we getting better doctors or engineers just because we have just because we have entrance tests?
So the real issue is, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. You see, the issue is that there are a number of boards. So the equivalence of, say, CBSE with ICSE with, say, the UP board and Maharashtra board and, say, Tamil Nadu board, that is the difficulty. If the admissions are based on marks, as they used to happen 40 to 50 years ago, it was not so difficult. Now with the type of competition that we have, the difference in the evaluation in the levels and the type of questions which are there in different boards, it is very difficult to have them moderated here. And therefore, it is better to have a common exam rather than base ourselves on the board exam, because then the tendency to have more marks in the board. So everybody will try to give 100 out of 100 if that is the criteria. So these exams will be there. But what is perhaps more important on what the policy emphasizes, that the evaluation or the assessment, in fact, it's not evaluation, it is the assessment, will be 360 degrees. 360 in the sense the other talents which a child has, say in what we call as extracurricular. So actually we fill up all the marks and then we put one or two sentences that extracurricular, so this is good and this is very good, meaning thereby that the other subjects which are there do not have the same importance. So actually there are some subjects which have the marks which are considered to be important, where you have the best of 4 and best of 5. That is the type of system we have developed. So we are shifting away from that system, give a holistic progress card to the student, where the other achievements which the child has are equally important. They are part of the progress card. And it also tells the child and the parents that other avenues are open to him or her. To give a concrete example, if it is there that he or she is good in music, right now it will appear only in the extracurriculars. What we are planning is that the holistic report card will also have a column about his music abilities, and depending on the choice of the student, he or she in the higher education can study physics along with music. I mean, he can or she can have music as one subject, physics and maths as another two subjects. This flexibility, which does not exist now, is actually leading to a rat race where every parent, I mean, I'm sorry to generalize, but almost every parent, the first question is to the child, marks kitna aaya? So, okay, 19 by 20. How many of your colleagues, I mean, the classmates got 20 out of 20? So, okay, 4 of them got 20 out of 20. How many are above you? How many are below you? So, the marks, and marks, as if the entire life is based on marks. If you see the top CEOs, many of them actually did not go to the IITs. They went to other institutions. Many of them did not go to these institutions altogether. So this whole tendency that we have, this fire that we have with marks, we wanted to go away. Let the child develop, let the talent develop. They may be doing far better in life compared to what we go by the mark sheets and the marks and only the exams. That is the whole idea.
So in the policy document, the draft which was shared last year for public feedback and the document that we have now, the 2019 draft made a clear commitment with regard to extending the Right to Education Act to cover preschool as well as high school. This document does not make sort of a clear-cut commitment. So if you can just elaborate, let us know what the government's intention is as far as extending RTE Act is concerned.
Government is committed to universalization.
Sorry,
the document very clearly says the document very clearly says that we stand committed to universalization up to class 12 and also for preschool. Okay. That is also the sustainable development goal, which we have referred in the document, that we are aligning our policy with the SDG. And as you know, India is a signatory to the SDGs and to the Universal Declaration, UN Declaration on SDGs. And therefore, the policy is aligned to the UN Declaration, which talks of universalization. And we are committed at various levels. It has been, I mean, in the document we have mentioned that 12 years, 3 years of preschool and 12 years of school, that universalization will be there. And various interventions have been talked about, the KGBVs, for education of the girl child, the Kasturba Gandhi Vidyalayas all over will be extended up to grade 12. Other interventions are also mentioned. So that commitment for universalization is there, both for preschool and also for completion of 12 years of schooling.
So we'll move to, before we move to audience questions, I'll just quickly ask you a few questions about higher education. The word multidisciplinary comes up very often in the document, especially in the higher education segment. But we don't know what the document really means a multidisciplinary. Let me, for instance, he talks about phasing out single stream education institutes. He even talks about IITs, that IITs should move towards opening more departments, towards multidisciplinarity. So, for instance, I mean, right now the IITs are doing that. IIT Delhi, for instance, has a school of public policy. IIT Kharagpur has a school of medicine. But when we are saying multidisciplinarity, are we saying that these institutes will continue to admit students for engineering programs, and those engineering programs itself will be multidisciplinary? Or maybe 10-15 years down the line, can students actually admission, say, in a humanities 4-year multidisciplinary program in an IIT? If you can maybe clarify that for our viewers.
I'm much prepared because there was an article in Indian Express on this very subject on the op-ed page. I was reading the op-ed page in the morning. I think we call it the editorial page. There was an article referring to the policy and to the. You see, multidisciplinarity will go much beyond. And that will be that not only the institutions become multidisciplinary, the students have a choice. And the next phase, right now we will be the exit, multiple entry and exit and flexibility that we are talking about. Once it stabilizes, say by another 3 to 4 years, then we can even have a system where you can take 4 courses from DU and 2 courses from IIT Delhi and say 1 course from GNU. I mean, why not? If we have this system of an academic bank of credit, if the credits are standardized, say between Delhi University, GNU, Jamia and IIT, then it is always possible to even take course from the other issue. So the system of education hubs that we have been talking about, one of the most difficult things had been that while one may acquire knowledge at the other institute, their grades cannot be added because the grade point systems in different institutions are different. Once we are having some sort of a standard grade point system and we have the agreement between the institutions that all those who join this academic bank of credit and who have the standardized credit system, they will also be able to exchange credits. So it will even be possible, particularly in the online courses, that a girl who has joined, say, economics or let us say BTech in IIT Delhi takes 2 courses in economics from Delhi University. Because they are online courses, when no movement is required, online courses are permitted up to 40%. So this sort of but of course this system will take time. I mean, first we'd like to stabilize the system of exchange and entry and exit within the institution. Once we are able to do that within the institution, then we can even extend it to across the institution. Supposing somebody's parents get transferred from Delhi to Chennai. If there is some agreement, then the person need not stay in Delhi or Chennai. They can take their credits and go to some college there. But that is, of course, a little distant future, not so distant, maybe another 5 years down the line, we could be having this.
So the policy talks about the overarching regulator, which is HECI. What we want to understand is, I mean, the argument given in the document for setting up HECI is that, there is a conflict of interest, there is too much concentration of power in bodies like UGC, AICTE, and that there is an over-regulation in higher education. What stops the government from implementing all of these reforms under the current structure? How will sort of dissolving 2 bodies and replacing them with an overarching regulator, how does that guarantee that the problem of concentration of power or over-regulation doesn't happen then? And why can't these reforms be implemented under the current structure itself? I mean, if the idea is to not regulate so much, UGC and AICTE should try and give more autonomy to the institutions. So how does HECI help addressing these problems, and why can't these be implemented under the current structure?
You see, I would like to answer it in 2-3 parts. Firstly, current structure has evolved from the earlier policies. Until and unless we change the policy, this question will arise. For example, AICTE was set up under the earlier policy. We cannot, I mean, like the Delhi University 4-year course, which was introduced sometimes in 2010, one of the biggest problems occurred because the policy was 10 plus 2 plus 3, but the university was having 10 plus 2 plus 4. So it is always better to have it in the policy. Of course, policy recommendation is not a substitute for parliamentary approval. After all, this change in the structure will require approval of the parliament. We'll have to draw up a bill. So this is the, let us say, administrative and the legal side. The other side, which could be the academic side, will be that until and unless we have what we call as more transparent system, and what we have said, instead of inspections, the new system will be voluntary self-disclosure based, online self-disclosure based transparent system. So the second part that you are mentioning, how the change will come. The change will come not by replacing one institution by another, replacing one bureaucrat by another, replacing one chairman by another. That does not change the system. But what the policy has said, that instead of the system of inspections, we will be having online disclosure-based system. For example, how many rooms and location and building, etc. I mean, with today's technology, it can be easily verified. If the coordinates are given, the photographs are there, we can easily verify down to the, within the room, whether it is properly furnished or not. Even that can be verified. So when the technology is so advanced, we don't need inspectors. And the third thing which is happening, that we have different councils. For example, AICTE, UGC, we have the National Council of Teachers Education, and we also have the Distance Education Board and the Council. Sometimes they take decisions which may affect the others. So an overarching body, firstly, nobody has to run to 4 different bodies. For example, if there is a university which has a management board, then they require the approval of both UGC and AICTE. If they also have a 4-year or even a 2-year B.Ed course, they will also require approval from NCT. So it will be far better if all these type of regulations are with one body. The accreditation, which is again in India, we have NAC accreditation for the university and program accreditation by NBA. So if we bring together accreditation at one place, instead of 2 different systems having, university systems having NAC and the AICTE system having NBA, that again can be brought together under the umbrella of the accreditation vertical, which has been talked about. And then you have the General Education Council, and finally the funding, because different councils, particularly AICTE and UGC, are funding institutions in different ways. What we are planning is that there could be a combined competitive funding, not based on the type of institutions, but based on the outcomes. And that can be done by one body within the Higher Education Council. There could be one vertical which could be looking after funding. So these reforms, basically, they reduce the duplication which is going on, say NAC and NBA. It reduces the regulatory duplication which are going on, that one has to apply to 3 different bodies for different courses. It also brings together that these are the negatives, but the synergy, the positive synergies which can occur by bringing all these together, they are also enormous. So that is why the idea is to have one overarching body with 4 verticals, but only the act per se, passing of an act does not change. As we have been discussing, and maybe at the end I would like to say that ultimately the mindset has to change. If we have the same type of persons, simply changing the body and changing the nameplate of the in front of the UGC gate will not change it. So we got to change the entire structure. The next step will be change the processes, and the third and most important will be to bring that mindset that we are not the regulators, we are the facilitators.
But sir, like you mentioned that, one education institutions may have to run to different bodies, for instance, currently. But then does that, if we are moving towards multidisciplinary institutions and say under one roof you have an institution offering, say, a medical program, a law program, and humanities program, does that problem for such an institution, that problem still persists? Because HECI, why has law and medicine been kept out of it? Wouldn't that same institution now also have to go to the Medical Commission, would have to go to the regulatory body for legal education, and then also go to HECI, so that the problem of multiple bodies, wouldn't that still remain?
That will still remain, and it is a conscious decision. There's a lot of discussion on this point. Historically, what has happened is that medical education and the recent Indian Medical Commission, which has been formed, so that came just before this policy. While we were discussing the policy, the Indian Medical Commission has been established. Now, disturbing, what they're doing is to bring together the different branches of medicine and surgery together. Legal education has developed quite a lot in the last few years. But if you see their model, the national law schools, by and large, everywhere the Chief Justice of the High Court is the Chancellor. And many of these national law schools have Chief Justice of India as a visitor. So changing that entire structure, because then Higher Education Commission, if we bring these institutions under Higher Education Commission of India, then the Chancellor of the Institute is the Chief Justice of the State High Court. So these issues, the practical issues, we went into all these details that practically it will not be appropriate to bring these institutions at this stage. But while making the policies, we have said the general education concept that we have will consult other professional bodies. But direct regulation, because they are anyway under the High Court and the visitor is the Honorable Chief Justice of India, that is why we have excluded legal education.
We're going to take some audience questions now, sir. Can we connect to Anamika Srivastav?
Sir, the new education policy proposed to establish school complexes because they feel that the schools with very small enrollment, that is maybe less than 20 students, they seem unviable. So they'll be establishing school complexes. So my point is that for a country where like India, where universal education is still a dream, so how far is this justified to give more importance and more priority to enrollment than the accessibility?
You are very right. This was discussed in detail, discussed many times. On one side is the access, the other side is quality. Many small schools, they are two-teacher schools, and if one of them is absent for some reason, then you have one teacher for about 40 students, but the number may be 40, but actually they are spread across different classes. So you have, say, 10 students in class 3, another 10 in class 4, and you have one teacher who is actually teaching all of them. The school complex will solve this problem, that you have more number of teachers, better resources. For example, the sharing of resources could be there in the schools. The negative side is, what about the distance which the child will have to travel? Say in the hilly areas, particularly I'm talking about hilly areas or the tribal areas, say in Jharkhand or say Chhattisgarh, Uttarakhand, say Himachal. If we make a school complex which is 8 to 10 kilometers, that may affect the child in a very negative sense, that traveling, even if there is some bus or some transport which is made available, the travel time for a small child will be not less than an hour in the morning, another hour in the afternoon. So that is why we have not made it compulsory, but we have said that preferably where you have large number of small schools, particularly in the areas, they can be brought under one complex so that sharing of resources and having more teachers in that school complex will help increase the quality. So a fine balance has to be maintained between quality and accessibility. Of course, as you said, in the far off areas where the transport is not available or the schools are very far off, we will have to continue with very small size schools. I mean, to again give an example from the election side, there are places where there are only one voters, but an election booth is open, polling booth for one voter. So if there are far off areas, yes, but where it is possible to club the resources, it will be better to have a school complex so that they can share the library or the school ground, the good teacher in science or maths, they can be shared. That is the whole idea.
Can we connect to Rajesh, please?
In previous academic structure, primary education started at the age of 6 years. Pre-primary education was not mandatory. In new education policy, foundational education begins at the age of 3 years. If any student miss out pre-primary, will he or she be able to get admitted to standard 1, or at the age of 5 or 6 he has to start again with the pre-primary structure? Thank you very much, please.
A very important question which has been raised, a doubt which is there before many parents. Firstly, it will be because we are talking of universalization of early childhood care and education. Therefore, the attempt will be to enroll all of them at the age 3 itself, either in an Anganwadi or a play school. Different models have been mentioned in the policy. But in case somebody fails to do so, or somebody is not here, I mean, a large number of Indians, they are, say, in Dubai and Gulf, or maybe somebody returns from abroad and they have not done their preschool wherever they were, say in US or Canada, then they don't need to repeat. The policy itself says that through a bridge type of a course, easily they will be wherever they have to enter, say in grade 1 or grade 2, they will be able to enter. So there is no reason to be worried that children will be made to repeat in case they have not joined the preschool.
Okay. Can we connect to Arvind Chaturvedi?
Mr. Khare, my question relates to opening up of higher education sector for foreign players. In the existing policy framework, the institutions are allowed for exchange programs of students and faculty, collaborative research, internship, dual degree. I mean, all these things are permitted in the existing setup. Now, what is expected distinct advantage in permitting these foreign universities to set up the campuses in India? What cannot be achieved without setting up the campuses?
There are two issues. First is we are talking about promoting Indian institutions to set up campuses abroad. If you take 12.7, para 12.7, it talks in detail that we will be setting up, we'll be promoting Indian institutions to go abroad. Now, it says 12.8 says India will be promoted globally as a study destination. So first issue is if we are promoting our institutions to set up campuses abroad, we cannot deny a reciprocal arrangement if a foreign institution wishes to come here. But we have very categorically said that these must be the top 100. We will not be going for low-grade universities to start operating in India and start fleecing the students here just in the name of a foreign university. So that is one. Second is, many a times these foreign agreements, particularly with good universities, and we have already mentioned in the policy that those from among the top 100 universities in the world will be facilitated to operate in India, top 100. So if some of them do come here, and we are talking of top 100, not even the ordinary ones, And incidentally, as of now, we are not in top 100. So this will definitely improve our rankings, because rankings which are there by the international bodies like Times or QS, they have a very significant component of international students and faculty. Having these campuses here of the top universities collaborating with our universities or as a standalone campus will definitely improve the system.
Can Prashant Nikam ask his question, please?
It has been mentioned in policy, scheduled tribe students decline in enrollment in higher education is steeper. So it has also been mentioned to make a special mechanism. So what would be a special mechanism for tribal community students to improve enrollment in higher education? Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a very, very important question. And since I have worked for many years in Jharkhand, which is a predominantly tribal area, and if you are aware, the present Minister of Tribal Affairs, Arjun Mundaji, is also from the same state. This has attracted our attention, firstly, to have special mechanisms like Eklavya School. The problem is at all levels, at the school level, at the higher education level. So have special arrangement for school, that is one. The second and perhaps more important is this policy talks of special education zones. What I'm saying is that there are certain pockets, even the state may be developed. I don't know if Mr. Nikam is from Maharashtra, but I'll give an example from Maharashtra, that while Mumbai and Pune may be very high in the education rankings, they have one of the finest institutions in Pune and Mumbai, Gadchiroli may be lagging behind. So Gadchiroli will then be declared as a special education zone so that focused attention and focused financial resources could be pulled in there. Otherwise, the state as such will appear to be very well developed. But the areas which are underdeveloped, and mostly they are the tribal areas, they will come under the special education zone. So individual interventions through schools and scholarships, and also regional interventions by declaring SEZs.
Aurea Fernandez, is she here?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good evening. I'd like to ask you, sir, how would a 2-exam policy work for Standard 10 students? Wouldn't it increase the stress factor twice over?
Could you repeat, how will it increase the stress?
How would a 2-exam policy be if there's a mention made that Standard 10 students at that level, the board level, can go in for 2 exams? Now, wouldn't that increase the stress factor for the student?
No, let me just clarify. The student is appearing only in 1 exam or the second exam if he so desires. This is a choice being given to the student. Like, for example, SAT and GRE are held twice a year. Even the JEE exam is held twice a year. So the student does not have to appear twice. But supposing the first exam, the student could not do well, or in the first exam, the student fell ill, and now the whole year is wasted. So that is why we are having the second exam. Instead of having the present system of compartmental type of exams, the student is being given a choice. If for any reason I could not appear in the summer exam, then I have the choice of appearing in the winter exam. So the student, there is no extra burden, rather a choice is being given, because many times it so happens that the students are not well, or for some family reasons they are not able to appear. That is the choice being given, extended to the students.
Is Modini here?
My question would be what would be the effect of this new NEP policy for work integrated learning programs in higher education? For example, we have the BITS WILP program, some programs by IIT Madras as well. So any guidelines or points for the work integrated learning program?
Are you from BITS?
Sorry, sir.
Are you associated with? Are you associated with BITS? with the program or otherwise?
No, not yet.
Okay. Let me tell you that this problem has been there for quite some time. The work integrated learning program.
So if you can just briefly, for the
UGC
benefit of our viewers, just tell them what the WILP is. I don't think everyone would know what WILP is.
Now, WILP is a program which has been running in BITS Pilani for many years. They have the classrooms and they also have the work experience. So instead of complicating, say, WILP, we can say that partly it is the classroom based or the university based uh, uh, system of education. The other part is the work experience. UGC had raised certain objections and BITS was asked to discontinue this program. The Vice Chancellor and the Chancellor, Mr. Kumar Mangalam Birla, had taken up this matter with me, and I had told them at that stage itself that the National Education Policy 2020, when it comes, will resolve all these issues because we are ourselves promoting work integration, the vocational with the general. The policy clearly says that while BVOC may continue, the general universities may offer vocational courses. So what we call as work experience, that does get integrated in the new policy. There is no distinction between, say, experience related learning or the classroom learning. If I could just add one line here, that the policy focuses on the learning outcomes and not the way the learning, whether it is online, it is offline, it is work experience based. If the student has learned, then there is no issue in grant of degree just because the student was not in the class or the student was taking online courses. Those distinctions will not be there in the new system that we are bringing. And for BITS Pilani, from this year itself, that work integrated learning program will be allowed.
Excuse me, can I have a follow-up question?
Can you make it quick, please? We have a few more listeners like that.
Okay, it's a short one. So, Kharesh sir, are more universities plan to join such a vocational course or a work integrated program?
Actually, the policy encourages them. And we expect that more and more universities will be interested. In fact, I'm already getting calls from various universities. They want to know how soon they can enter. And my only advice to them is, before entering, please make your curriculum transparent. Let the students know what they are in for. Later on they should not complain to MHRD or to UGC that so and so we were fleeced by the university. So if that transparent system and declaration is there, they can have it in 2021 because some of the universities are still taking admissions. They can introduce a course in 2020 batch itself.
Is Shayantan there? Shayantan Majumdar?
So I'd like to first of all ask about the 4-year course, which is the research degree program. So you've mentioned that academic bank of credits might be ready by December this year. So will that be applicable for the current final year students as well? And they can get some credits and later join the 4th year program to get their research degree. Otherwise, in this market, their degree might not have the same value. And so my second question is regarding the empowerment of women and socially and economically disadvantaged groups. So there is a provision of creating a SE, social educational zone, but no very concrete incentives are not mentioned for women and economically disadvantaged groups. So how will they achieve that so that they can be an equal part of the higher education sector? And so one last question would be, is the education ministry...
We can't take 3 questions. Let's answer 2. The first question about the fact that the current 3-year undergraduate program students, whether they can actually, in a way, convert their program, from what I can understand, into a 4-year program, you're saying, if the academic
Right,
bank...
ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
So if
Yes,
you could
ma'am.
answer that, please.
Let me start by answering a second question. That for women, we are having a gender inclusion fund. In fact, this is a new initiative which is there. That like we have Nirbhaya fund for the security, we will be having a gender inclusion fund which will focus only on women education. Although I would also like to mention that as on date, in higher education, the enrollment of women is 0.1% higher than. So it is high, but where do we lack is that they are not in the leadership position, they are not in the professional process. So while their enrollment is now not only at par, it is slightly higher than men. They are mostly in the so-called traditional courses, and we would like to encourage them to go for professional courses, and those who are already there in the system to go for the leadership roles. For example, very few women directors or today. That is, it's a lacuna in the system which we need to correct. And a gender inclusion fund will go a long way in correcting some of the imbalances. For the other groups also, it has been mentioned that with the help of concerned ministries, because the ministries are also there, the Ministry of Social Justice, Ministry of Tribal Affairs, and the Department of Disability Affairs, we'll be taking up special program to improve upon the enrollment of the focus group. But the focus groups have been clearly mentioned. Now coming to the credit bank, that after testing, we will start from the first step of the IT. Those who participate. But what we propose is to have a separate DigiLocker type of a system for other graduates. There will be graduates who wish to keep their documents in a DigiLocker. That we will make arrangements. Already we have a National Academic Depository. We can have them deposit there. But we wish to go in a systematic manner, starting from the first semester, because the first semester of those who get admitted this year in the institutions, that results will come sometimes in February, because the semester itself is delayed by about 3 months. So the semester will end around January end or February. By that time, the Academic Bank of Credit will be able to take care of the first semester. And then we keep on adding up to the second semester, third semester, and so on.
And so if a student, as far as the new high disciplinary 4-year course is concerned, you're saying that only students who seek admission in the first year would be able to, I mean, this is a course that you start afresh, right? You cannot.
As of now, the 4-year course will have to be designed. Okay. I'm not let me clarify that adding 1 year to 3 years is not a 4-year course.
Right.
A 4-year integrated course that we have for engineering, or even for, say, the BSc or BA, LLB. So those 4-year courses are integrated courses. It's not an add-on that after 3 years you add one, so it becomes 4 years.
Okay. All right. Is Rahul there? Rahul, go ahead, and then we'll just take one more audience question after.
Yeah. Good evening, sir. Unlike higher education and school education, which follows certain rules, regulations, and registration process, we don't have anything like that for early childhood education till now. I mean, both at central and state level, to guide and control preschools or Anganwadis. So, going forward, are there any thoughts into that? Thank you.
The policy itself says that 5-year curriculum will be prepared. So that curriculum will be a common, the framework, that activity-based learning. So how do you start? What is the starting point, and then what is the end point of the 3 years? At the end of 3 years, what should be the learning outcomes? Then again, grade 1 and grade 2, what are the learning outcomes? That will be there in the curriculum framework. But registration, if you are talking about registration, that we will leave to the individual states, because different states have different systems, and having a very centralized system may not work because of the diversity. So registration of Anganwadis, play schools, etc., that will continue to be with the state governments.
Is Rekha Krishnan there?
Good evening, Mr. Khare. My question is about the 5 + 3 + 3 + 5, 4 system that you have introduced. I just want to understand, why are we clubbing the first 5 years of children's education as 5? Because you have mentioned that the first 3 years the children will be in the Anganwadi system, and then the 2 years, that is class 1 and 2, they will be in the formal school system. So shouldn't it be 3 plus 2 plus 3 plus 3 plus 4?
This was discussed at length with Dr. Kasturi Rangan, who had also organized various discussions with NIMANS and very well-known experts in this field. The development, according to the entire group, the development of the neurons occurs in the children at this stage, from up to the 8 years age. And that is the stage where we need to intervene. Instead of having all types of coaching programs and advanced tutorials and tuitions at grade 8 and 10, the intervention is required from early stages, and the foundational learning of 5 years is what he is recommending. Now, this 5 years will have a common curriculum. There's 3 years in Anganwadi and 2 years in school. That is the administrative side. If I could explain it in simple words, the curriculum or the academic side is for 5 years, so that there is a continuity, there is no discontinuity between what is being learnt in the Anganwadi and what is being learnt in the school. They are all in one continuum for 5 years. This is on the academic side. But on the administrative side, the younger children, because there are so many issues, if those of my friends who are from the education sector, they would appreciate that bringing very young children to schools directly has its own problems and challenges, security, and all the issues which are there for school children, for very small children. So we will like to have the administrative side, 3 years in the play school or in the Anganwadi, 2 years grade 1 and 2 in the what we call as a primary school. But the academic curriculum will be common right from age 3 up to the time the child enters grade 2 plus. So the calendar, the academic curriculum would be common, but the administrative system would be different.
So
it is not 3 plus 2 plus 3. It is 3, it is total 5 common curriculum, then 3, that is what they have called as preparatory stage. In fact, we'll give that to Indian Express, maybe you can publicize it more. They have called the first 5 years as foundational, the next 3 years as preparatory, the next 3 they call as middle, and 4 they call as secondary. So the grading is not as per age alone or class alone. They have a scientific reason that foundational, preparatory, middle, and then secondary. Yeah.
So that's the end of audience questions. So I just have 2 more. If you can please spare 5 more minutes.
Yes.
Correct. So the document talks about phasing out of the affiliation system, where a university ends up affiliating hundreds of colleges, and it talks about phasing that out. But in the same breath, it also says that, the affiliating university is responsible for mentoring these affiliated colleges so that, kind of they achieve minimum benchmarks. Just 2 quick questions related to that. A, the state universities are already overburdened. Are we expecting too much from them by, asking them to, before the disaffiliation process happens, that you try and mentor them? And secondly, state universities are also very underfunded. So I'm presuming, and a lot of people also say that, the affiliation fee actually makes up a part of its funds. It helps the funding bit. So would the disaffiliation process, how do you expect the state universities to make up for the funds lost after disaffiliating universities? These questions.
Issue needs to be reframed a little bit. More than the funding, the affiliating universities are also overburdened with the administrative work relating to the universities. A university which has, say, 800 affiliated colleges, I'm sure the Honorable Vice Chancellor will not even know the names of the principals or even the colleges. 800 is too big a number to even recall the names of the college. So it is, the policy says that the number of affiliated colleges should be brought down to 300. And of course, that means that new universities will have to be set up. Otherwise, say if a university has 800 colleges, means now 2 more universities will have to be set up so that each one of them have about 250 to 300. And definitely a RUSA type of program will be there to assist the state government. Otherwise, they will not be able to fund the new universities. Secondly, it also talks about graded autonomy to colleges. So the colleges which are good, they become autonomous. Now, what is good and bad will be decided by accreditation and not by, say, discretion of the officials sitting either here or at the state capital. So those who are A+, the colleges have to be themselves accredited. Those who are A+, they will be granted certain autonomy of granting degrees and also formulating their courses, having their own finances. Those who are A, they would be having lesser autonomy, and below that, they will have to work hard and they will continue with the university as an affiliated college. Because if we discontinue the system, there will be a major issue of the students, because there are a huge number of students who are enrolled in these affiliated colleges. So that is why they will be phased out over 15 years. Phasing out means some of them, which are really good, they become degree granting autonomous colleges. Others, they continue for the time being with the universities, and we increase the number of universities so that the number of number of colleges affiliated with each university comes down.
So a lot is being read into the fact that the 2019 report of the Kasturirangan Committee and the final policy document, the 2019 report spoke about student participation. There was a provision on setting up systems and mechanisms to enable students to participate in, say, the institutional process of a university. That seems to have been dropped from the final policy document. A lot is being read into that. I mean, student participation is being described as, participation in cultural activities. But a lot of this is being read as, it seems a little discouraging for student politics. So if you can just elaborate on that, as in why was that dropped from the final policy document?
If I remember correctly, you are referring to 12.09 and 12.10 of the policy, of the present policy. 12.09 is student activity and 12.10 is about student financing.
So there is this one subheading which says student participation.
Yes, that is 12.
Right. So under that, there was initially provision on student participation in institutional processes, which is no longer there in the final document.
Student activity and participation, that is 12.9 and 12.10.
Right.
Now, many people are comparing the draft, which was running into more than 200 pages, with the final policy, which runs into about 27 chapters, but I think the total of pages is 68. And comparing them and saying that this has been dropped and that has been dropped. Of course, some of the items have been paraphrased. They have been paraphrased. They do appear as if some particular foreign language has been dropped, some particular participation in politics has been dropped. As far as student unions are concerned, if I recall correctly, the Lindo committee had made recommendations and there is an order of the Honorable Supreme Court. So whether it is mentioned specifically about student politics or not mentioned, it does not make any difference. So much is being read in the reduction from a 200-page document to a 68-page document. But the spirit of the document is exactly what Dr. Kasturirangan had written. In fact, he had said yesterday before in his speech just before the Honorable Prime Minister that he's so very happy that the spirit of what he wanted in the policy is reflected here in the document, and along with other members, because all members have also accepted. And this document, the final document, was discussed with them. Let me just clarify. This was discussed with the Kasturi Rangan committee, with their members. Their suggestions were taken at various levels. For example, Rashtriya Shiksha Ayog is also not there.
Right.
If you read carefully, Rashtriya Shiksha Ayog, which was there in the earlier, is not here.
The Indian Education.
Because we have made the education service. Let me clarify. Indian Education Service was an idea of TSR Subramanian committee. Dr. Kasturi Rangan and the other members. They were very clear that in the present setup of center and state, it is better to empower the states rather than have one more All India service. So this was the view which finally emerged, that having more All India service will lead to more bureaucratization and centralization. So it is better not to have the Indian Education Service and empower the states. And instead of a Rashtriya Shiksha Ayog, we have, it was agreed in discussion with Dr. Kasturi Rangan and all members that we will be strengthening the CABE, which is the existing arrangement. But, CABE meets on and off, does not have any permanent secretariat. It is more like an advisory body. So that CABE is to be strengthened. That has been clearly mentioned in the policy. So these, from the larger document to the shorter document, all I would say is that this has been made in consultation with the committee. And just to clarify, is this the last question or you have something more?
I had one more question, but sir, go ahead.
Okay, you have your question, then I'll clarify.
Okay.
Or maybe I can do it now. That many newspapers, they are saying that the key person, what I saw in the key person behind the policy, I'm not the key person. Key person is Dr. Kasturi Rangan. The entire policy and discussion, of course, I'm the coordinator between the government and Dr. Kasturi Rangan and the members. But the key person who actually drafted the policy is Dr. Kasturi Rangan.
Right. So the opposition, there has been one criticism from the opposition parties that this document should have been discussed once in, it doesn't require the nod of the parliament, but this should have been discussed once in parliament. And then this should have been passed by the cabinet. Your response to that? And this is the last question, sir.
No, as far as the party and opposition party are concerned, I don't belong to either of them. So as a professional civil servant, we have nothing to do with politics. Parliamentary Standing Committee had taken a full meeting on this subject. The various drafts were presented there, but final policy document, which is with us, that is the discussion which we had with the Kasturi Rangan committee. Now, what the opposition party is saying, I have nothing to comment on either of them. So as a professional, I think I need not and should not actually comment on this.
All right. Thank you so much, sir. That's all the time we have. Thank you for sparing an extra 20 minutes, actually. We really appreciate this. This was a pretty fruitful discussion. Thank you again, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. In 2040, all the young people like you would be there to see how this policy transforms the entire country. Because 21st century will be a knowledge society. And this particularly is the one which will encourage India to become knowledge creator, become a leader in global knowledge creation. I may not be there, but I am sure young people like you would then appreciate in 2040 and 2050 what this policy, how the policy has transformed in education. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.